Hello and welcome back to another episode of Star Wars Alliance. And of course, I am your host, Clay. And with me today is Katie. She will not be speaking too much. If you're here on YouTube, you do see her. She is currently muted. I'm sure she's about to say hi right now. She just unmuted.
Hi, guys.
But Katie is recovering from a family illness. I had this happen to me when my daughter went to daycare, and now finally Katie has joined the club of parenthood, and she gets to get sick with the rest of us. So
I get sick anyways. So, why would you wish this curse upon me?
I am so sorry. There's a joke that goes around with a lot of parents. It's just like, hey, you know what? We will trick you into thinking, oh, family and parenthood is so fun. Join us, join us. And then when it finally happens, you start to get sick. The chaos happens, the terrible twos happens, and then you're like, ha 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 ha. You fell into our trap. It's chaos, and you are now in the chaos with us. But
yes, and I've got an angry baby in the background, guys. That's why I was muted. I'm gonna try to keep muted if I hear her in the background. That way it doesn't come through, but just in case.
Now, of course, for all of you who are joining in the YouTube chat, as well as those clicking on that podcast episode, you can clearly see by this title that we are going to be talking to Stephen Barnes, and he is actually here with us today. Stephen, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing fine, thank you. Life is good.
Now, Stephen, from Legends to canon, I know that you have written before the Cestus Deception.
Yes.
Deception. I will be completely honest. Katie and I had multiple conversations about, hey, this needs to be on our list of reviews. It is on our Google Drive of planning, and it has been immense chaos in our households. I have it on my Libby, and I was unable to read past the first 3 pages because things have gotten a little chaotic. It is something that I'm still eager to read.
We need an audiobook. We're both big audio people.
We are very big.
I think an audiobook exists. I'm not absolutely certain.
So it's an abridged audiobook. It's not an unabridged.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
it only will have, like, I think currently on Audible, the abridged versions are anywhere from, I think, as short as like 15 minutes. I've seen one, or like only an hour, and it doesn't cover the entire book.
What? That's
Very
bizarre.
Yeah, like the X-Wing books, because I fell into this trap with a lot of my audiobooks and was getting the X-Wing books before they announced the Essential Legends collection. And they were like 3 to 4 hours long. And now the audiobooks that are coming out, they're like 12 to 15 hours long.
Yeah. So it is, like I said, it's in my Libby library app, and I am very eager to read it, because I will say this, and I also want to say, we were all shocked by receiving your very wonderful words when you found us with our review of Glass Abyss. The person who runs our podcast network was the one that shared the screenshot of your kind words, and we were just like, oh my gosh, that's and of course people in our network didn't necessarily know who that was. I was like, this is the author of the book. Oh my gosh, this is amazing, this is great. Which is why
thank you very much for that.
Reach out and
You're
speak
welcome.
with you today. So first question, because I know a lot of people are very much into a little background with me. I started this journey with this podcast through the High Republic phase that Star Wars has been doing. And then Katie has introduced me into the cult of Star Wars. And so I am gradually reading more and more of these books, whether it be Legends, whether it be canon, and all of this other stuff.
There's a ton of them out there.
there is so much. And so our first question for you is, what was it like to return to the Star Wars franchise 20 years later?
Well, it was a lot of fun. I mean, I'm a different person. I'm a better writer. And I just gotten finished working in a television show on the writer's room for Friday the 13th, the Crystal Lake show that Brian Fuller was doing last year, when my agents called me and asked me if I'd be willing to do it, if I'd be interested in writing a Star Wars novel. I talked with the editor, and so it was like a Mace Windu novel. Okay, so I had a couple of very specific questions that I needed to ask Lucasfilm before I could make a decision of whether or not I wanted to do it, and they had the right answers to those questions. I won't say specifically what those were, although if you'd like to, I might be able to answer those questions later when we're off the air. And so it was a matter of, I mean, I think that the first one I did, Cess to Deception, was a career decision. Betsy Mitchell, who was editing the books at the time, wanted me to write 2 novels that were set in prehistoric Africa. And I decided that I could not write those books unless I had at least a year for research and actually had a chance to go to Tanzania and do research on the ground. And so I got a 2-book contract for those from her, plus a Star Wars novel. In other words, I was writing a Star Wars novel partially to fund another project. So I had the time to do that. This time, I had a more personal intent. I wanted to create Mace Windu as an actual human being, and that so I had a personal investment. It wasn't just a career move, and I think that made a difference.
Very, very nice. And you actually touched up a little bit on one question that I had. Very early on in my childhood, going into my teen years, I love the process of writing. I've always wanted to be a writer. I do it occasionally just for fun. And I was always eager to ask these questions to other writers just because I always wanted to know the process. And you kind of touched up a little bit on it. So if you can elaborate on this a little more, you can. If you can't, that's totally fine. But one of the questions that I had written here was, who exactly approached you with the Mace Windu story? Were you approached for Mace Windu specifically, or
no? I was
were you
approached.
given
I was
a
approached
few-
for Mace Windu, and Elizabeth Schaefer was the name of the editor who approached me. She's the editor for the Star Wars novels. If you're talking about writing, I can tell you a 6-step process that we teach our students. And you're going to want to, write this down or rewatch it. The first step is write at least 1 sentence every day. 2, write 1 to 4 short stories every month. That's short stories, not novels. Short stories. Okay. 3, finish and submit at least 1 per month. 4, once you have polished and submitted it, do not rewrite that story unless an editor reaches out to you and says, we'd like to see this again if you'll change X or Y. 5, read 10 times as much as you write. And 6, repeat this process 100 times. So what you're planning to do is to write 100 stories before and submit them before you even ask the question of whether or not this is a path for you, whether or not you have the ability to do it. The doubts that you have, the questions that you have will always be there in the back of your mind. So you have to have a path in front of you. It's like your job is not to argue with the voice in your mind. Your job is to say, shut up, I've got another story to write. Okay.
That's so important.
That path has not failed a single student who has walked it. Not a single student who has walked that path has gotten past story 25 without selling. Not one.
That's amazing. That's great.
Yeah.
So
And
if you want
it's
to
so
talk about
important with
writing,
dealing with imposter syndrome.
yes, the imposter syndrome is always there. It's there in the
Mhm.
voices of the most popular, successful writers you can think of. You just learn to deal with it. You there's never been a story that I've written where there wasn't a point where I was saying, this is crap. This isn't going to work. That's just a voice that's in your head. It has nothing to do with what is true, any more than a voice that says, this is the greatest story ever written is automatically true. It's not for you to say, it's for the market to decide. So you have to write them, finish them, and send them out. And in that sense, the sincerest compliment is a check that clears the bank. A check from a stranger. What your local writing group says, or what your parents say, or what your spouse says, is all very nice. But what you want is to feel that there's someone on the other end who has had an emotional change, gift, expression that makes your work worth their money. I'm willing to trade my time and energy for yours because you're a professional storyteller and you have encapsulated something that is meaningful to me. If you can do that, and that's kind of, to me, that's the point you're looking for. Art being self-expression, successful art being self-expression with communication. Professional success is self-expression with communication that somebody's willing to change money for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very sound advice. Very, very looking forward to going back to this episode and listening to that over and over.
You got to ask me whatever you want. During the hour I'm here with you, this is your chance. You can ask me anything that you want. I'm open to that.
I currently work with a comic book distributor, and so I see these stories, go through our warehouse time and time and time again. And with us being in a network full of things that talk about DC and Marvel and Star Wars, we are all really big fans of the writing genre that goes along with these projects. So really honestly looking forward to going back to this and listening to it. One thing that I always like to ask people who are involved with Star Wars projects, I know that just through the help of Katie and, of course, Wikipedia, I know that you have a background in sci-fi. So, what was your first Star Wars experience?
That was the first Star Wars movie. I was in college, or I was just out of college when it came out. And I didn't see it the first day. I'd seen all the other movies the first day they opened. That one took me about a week to get to. I hadn't been impressed by the trailer. The trailer was, it looked like it was old. Maybe it had been shown a lot of times. It was a little bit faded out. And I just thought, but when I went to the movie, the first time that Star Destroyer went across the screen, I said, oh, okay, I get it. And I loved it. So that was my first experience.
Very fun. Going back on your sci-fi background, as a sci-fi novelist, what are some sci-fi tropes you would like to see more within Star Wars as a franchise, whether it be movies, TV, comic books?
Yeah, and let's try science fiction just for the sake of this. Harlan Ellison hated the term sci-fi, but then again, he worked for the Sci-Fi Channel, so it's a little ironic. There aren't really any. I mean, Star Wars is not science fiction. Star Wars is science fantasy. It's wizards and dragons, with science fiction image systems, and I understand that. So I don't expect them to suddenly start talking about the engineering aspect, of things. It's just that if I write a Star Wars novel, they're hiring me. And so my assumption is that they're smart enough to know what they're hiring. So my task was, I saw it as, imagine a Venn diagram with 3 overlapping symbols. I wanted to write a good Star Wars story. There was also a good science fiction story. There was also a good Steve Barnes story. With the and then hopefully I could hit that sweet spot where I could do that. But all I can do is be who I am. I don't have any other choice. It's a little late in my life to try to be somebody else. If they wanted something else, they needed to hire someone else. You hire me, I'm going to do me, and that's all I can do, is the best job that I can do. So I bring to it my tools, but I don't expect the franchise to change. A multi-billion-dollar franchise is doing something right. They're doing a lot of things right. My issues with Star Wars would not be in the sense of they need to have more what if, that's they need to explain how a Death Star extracts energy from a star, and no, they don't. They need to tell good stories about the human heart, against this particular background. And I think that they've had a fantastic run doing that. They just tell really good stories.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you already heard us kind of just gush over how we loved your design for the planet and the multi-level system and all of these other things that you created within the story. It was, for me, once you read it, you feel like, oh, that's such a simple, just thing for Star Wars, alien like and whatnot. But being in the story and just
look, man,
I don't know, the design of it was just very fun for me. It felt so.
I've been amused at some of the reactions. I had a couple people who weren't in love with the book said, well, I must have been working on this design for years and I put it into this. No, I didn't. I made it up as I was going. It's like I had so much fun. It was that I don't write. No, and my sense was that I didn't have $100 million of industrial light and magic CGI to make the world real.
Yeah.
In order to have, if I wanted to have realistic emotions, if I wanted people to actually have emotions, they had to believe in the world. So what I felt I could do was try, and I don't know if I succeeded. Like I said, it's not for me to say. It's for the fans to say. I decided to go with creating as realistic a world as I possibly could, and to have my language and my description of the world substitute for that $100 million worth of ILM special effects. It was a strategy. Was it a successful strategy? That's for you guys to tell me. I can promise that I honestly did the best job I could. I can promise that I really cared. And that my commitment every single day was to do the best job I could. And that enough of the fans would be happy with it, that it would be successful for the publishing company, the editor who trusted me, and Lucasfilm, who said yes to some things. Were there some issues along the way? Why, yes, there were, but all in all, I'm very happy. And perhaps a year from now, I'll say some additional things. But right now, I'm just happy that it worked out as well as it did. I honestly am, and I'm very grateful for having had the opportunity. It was a great time.
I have a friend who listens to the podcast. She's not a Star Wars person. She listens purely to support me. And when I said he described Matagos better than Tolkien described his land in Lord of the Rings, she instantly was texting me, was like, how could you do this? And I was like, I am not a Lord of the Rings person. So this is what I imagine, if I liked Lord of the Rings, this would be what it felt like. The prose and the description
I'm so
of the
glad.
landscape.
I truly am. I did kind of have the sense that I wanted to do the Dune of Star Wars.
That's kind of what it felt like. Yeah.
I did not feel an obligation I felt an obligation to the fans. I felt an obligation to the studio. I felt an obligation to my editor. I felt no obligation at all to the other writers who've written in Star Wars, written Star Wars novel. None, not a zippo. Nice people, I'm sure, wonderful people. Maybe some of them are, better writers than me, but I had no obligation to them. They saw things the way they did. I assumed that they brought themselves to the book. I had to bring myself. And if I felt like I did want to respect what had been done in the films, that my take on Mace Windu and the Star Wars universe is based on trying to be consistent with what we saw in the films. But I knew something about the films that informed me. This scene does not exist in the book, but I knew that no one who had ever written about Mace Windu could imagine him in his underwear dancing around the kitchen making pancakes. I knew that. But you see, I've known powerful people. I've known spiritual people. I've known warriors. I spent my entire life, studying these things. And trust me, they're human beings.
Mhm.
That there are people who the only thing they know about Mace Windu or want to know is that he kills people and barks orders. And I literally have seen some reviews where people are, kind of up in arms because I dared to suggest that there was more to him than that. I have some attitudes about people who would say that, and let's just say I felt no obligation to make them happy.
It was one of the things that we loved the most about the book. Katie has
The fact
been
that Mace
trying.
joked.
That was my big thing. The first instance of this book that really got me to say, I love this book. There's one scene where throughout the book, and of course, what we always say when it comes to talking about these books, we will have small spoilers, but in order for you to really get what we are saying and get a part of this conversation, we encourage everyone to go and read these books. So that way you can fully understand our appreciation and fully understand the conversation.
And buy copies for your friends.
Yes, 100%.
It's a business. What can I say?
It is. Support your local library too if you can.
Well, I love libraries.
As well.
I have no problem with libraries. If you can't afford to buy it, go to the library, ask them to get it for you, or just read it off the shelf. That's fine by me.
Mm-hmm.
Love libraries.
Katie has been trying her hardest on how to exactly word this question in particular. So we apologize if it doesn't really sound that amazing.
I've been trying to rephrase this for a week.
But I also want to add to it because of the joking aspect as well.
Yeah,
the moment that
it's fine. We'll all understand.
The moment that I loved was when Mace asked, "Oh, what number is this one?" Talking about, of course, the characters that
something in particular.
Very, very particular. And Mace's response was, "Oh, she needs to get a hobby."
Yes, absolutely. I had
one of the most hilarious adult-like jokes you could possibly put in a book, but also for the fact that
he should have brought flowers.
Mace Windu's mouth.
I was cackling like a maniac when I wrote some of these things.
It was so fun. But the question in particular, Mace is often described as the ideal Jedi.
Yeah.
To most people. Very hardened, very to the rules, very strict to the council and all of these other things. But to integrate a love connection for him with Kinshan Nightbird, what does that open up for Mace as a character to you personally?
No, it doesn't just open up Mace. It opens up the Jedi. Anakin said that Jedi aren't forbidden to love. They're forbidden to form attachments. So the question you have to ask is, if they're human beings, they also eat and go to the bathroom. If you have a problem understanding that, or if you have a problem with the concept of adult love, then you're going to have a problem with my book. I don't have a problem with these things. This is just what it is to be a human being. But you do have to ask, if you're going to go down that road, what does it mean to be a Jedi and love without attachments? What would that look like? Under what circumstances would that be? And I would look at it like, well, first of all, it's taking total responsibility. It's caring. It's understanding that you have an exalted position and you don't want to abuse the fact that power in and of itself is an attraction. Okay. If you don't understand that, you can mistake people's reactions to you, specifically a man who has a powerful position will be very attractive to women. And if you abuse that, you're a dog. as far as I'm concerned. So what would a Jedi be like? Well, clearly the implication there is the woman would have to be very powerful. That there would have to be no deception. There would have to be real clarity on that we have chosen this to share this moment together. And then it would be, you have your life, I have mine. Those things. So it was, and I talked with Elizabeth Shaver at my editor. We talked about this, about what would it mean? What would, if you can do little golden books of Star Wars, you can certainly have an adult novel set in the same universe.
Mhm.
And if you have a problem, if someone who has a problem with that, okay, that's okay. Not everyone, to be honest, not everyone matures at the same pace. There are other issues that are involved that, once again, I may or may not be willing to talk about on a public recording, but you could get me to talk about offline. It's a little delicate, and you can probably guess at some of the potential issues here. But once again, I have obligations to the fans and to Lucasfilm, and with feeling genuine gratitude for the opportunity. I'm not here to. There are certain things that are not appropriate to bring into the discussion, but I definitely wanted to ask the question: what would a romance be like for a Jedi? I think that I did exactly what I had in mind. It would be up to people to make a judgment about whether or not I did that correctly, and I can respect a variance of opinions there. But if you think that Jedi aren't human, that's interesting. If you think that the more perfect a Jedi is, the purer he is, okay. But if you think he wouldn't have a sense of humor, I mean, does it need to sleep? Does it need to eat? Does it have a hunger for touch? That's interesting. I disagree.
It's such a good point that, like, even with the higher public that we have right now, like, seeing the different takes on the Jedi there, but like bringing it into the more staunch rule following one, that those same characteristics can still apply.
Well,
here.
I did Mace break any Jedi rules?
Mm-mm.
No,
He
and
didn't.
that's why I think it's so fun, is because people can, like you say, have these very large and loud opinions about, oh, this character is this way and you can't break those rules and da 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 da. But like you said, you can do certain things without breaking rules.
I think that there are a lot of fans who haven't resolved some issues that they have. Like I said, as everybody matures at a different pace. And so they would like to imagine that the perfect warrior priest would have the same aversions that they have. And I believe that a lot of Star Wars fans, fantasy is more about the heart. Science fiction is more about the head. But I think that a lot of Star Wars fans would like to be Jedi, or as close as they could be, absent midichlorians. So I built into that book the things that I know about the path of being a sacred warrior. And having spent many decades studying these things and knowing a lot of people, I'm not saying I'm right, but I'm not a guy in a diner about these things. I didn't make this stuff up. I think a lot of people a lot of writers who wrote about Jedi were making it up. They don't know people who are walking a path similar to that. They've never tried to walk a path similar to that themselves. So they say what is in their minds, and it goes on the page, and it becomes canon for people who agree with that perspective. I believe they had the right to do that. And I believe that the fans had the right to agree with it. I have the same right to have a different perspective. And Lucasfilm and the publishing company were willing to sign off on my vision. That doesn't make it right. But you aren't talking about a history of people who
Mhm.
actually lived, are you? You're talking about a fantasy. If
Mhm.
somebody writes about Batman, you cannot write about Batman in a way that would create a path from being a normal human being to being Batman. That in essence, Batman is a superhero. He has superpowers. He has an unnatural amount of focus. Human
Mhm.
beings aren't really like that. You can't get there. So people who kind of think, well, if I, his power, superpower is that he's rich. They don't know rich people. I do. They're not Batman. Okay.
Yeah.
That you want, if you want me to believe that somebody could be Batman with money, first show me somebody who is a world-class athlete. At the very least, because it doesn't take a lot of money to be a world-class athlete. That's a demonstration of a fantastic amount of focus and clear values about that thing. So if I felt that I needed to be limited by writers who are fine writers and good people, but have never experienced anything like the states of mind that these people are going through, and I've spent, God, I want to say this without patting myself on the back, or if I preface this by saying that I'm aware that my knowledge is limited, my experience is limited. But what I can honestly say is that I've spent my entire life studying the martial arts and studying shamanic disciplines. And I've known people who were horizons distant from me in these things and in their commitment to being of power and authority and compassion in the world. And they're human beings.
I do enjoy also that small addition. It's very quick in the book as well, when you mention how Mace is practicing all of these lightsaber forms, but then immediately after, just that small comment of like, oh, working on this fighting style, and even this one behind closed doors that he's never shared before. It's these small little things that add to the character, but also, as we've seen, or the lack thereof, in other novels, we haven't seen a whole lot of hand-to-hand combat within the Star Wars universe. So adding those small little things also is something that I greatly appreciate.
Well, hand-to-hand combat, let's say for the samurai, jiu-jitsu came out of that. It was just until you could get your hands on a sword. You lose your sword on the battlefield, you use hand-to-hand combat to do the best you can. But if you think that anybody can be certain fighting empty-handed against a 3-foot razor blade, you are naive, my friend. So the idea that you might have to do that makes all the sense in the world to me if you look at the way warriors prepare, because you can't always have a lightsaber. What are you going to do? Or you can't always use a lightsaber. What are you going to do? There are going to be situations that do not call for that. What are you going to do? So having studied Filipino arts as well as other things, the movement of the Filipino arts is consistent between empty hands, single stick, double stick, staff, sword. It's all the same thing. Knife. They're the same movements extrapolated or used differently depending upon the implement in the situation. So I decided to consider that there to be a continuity of motion and thought between those different levels. Traditionally, most martial arts teach the empty hand before they teach weapon. Filipino martial arts teach weapon before empty hand. But however you want to look at it, that's the Tao. That's the complete circle. Empty hand, weapon. And the Marines say it clearly: the weapon is the man or the woman. If the weapon is the mind, everything else is just tools. So you have to be able to use dedicated tools, but you also have to be able to improvise. What are you going to do? I lose my lightsaber? Oops. Well, no. I mean, well, then you use the Force and so forth. That's cool. But on what planet do you not strengthen your body? And if you have a strong body and the same thought patterns about strategy and tactics and distance and rhythm and timing and focus and all those different things, psychological time distortion, all the things that factor into real martial arts, it doesn't make any sense to me that the Jedi would have unarmed movement. It just does.
Yeah.
It simply does not track with what human beings actually are.
Yeah, very much so. Kind of got a little lost there with the characterization.
I'm sorry.
But no. It actually goes directly from, of course, our main character being Mace Windu. Katie had a really good question, and this villain, absolutely terrifying. How did you go about designing Chulak as a character and designing his motivations throughout this?
Understand something. That book is chock full of references, to other books, other movies, stuff like that. If you didn't recognize that the basic plot pattern is a fistful of dollars, or
Okay.
Jimbo, so I said it clearly in the, in the afterward. But in the 1960s, there was a series of books called Modesty Blaze, the best female action character I have ever seen. The sort of created to be a female James Bond, but I think in many ways much more interesting. Written by Peter O'Donnell, who became a friend. I corresponded with him for decades. He wrote like 10 novels and wrote a comic strip that ran for over 40 years. And he wrote all of them. And I've got the entire thing. I've read through the whole thing like 5 times.
Wow.
And in the second Modesty Blaze novel, which was called Sabretooth, there were a pair of Siamese twins who had been separated with surgery, but linked themselves together to form, and fought together. And if they were not killing other people, they were constantly fighting each other. And their names were Chew and Locke. So, it's very clearly, it's just like, I'm just having fun. I just thought, well, what would be a good adversary? How about someone who could fight with 4 arms and 4 legs, twice as strong, with a demi-psychic link that enabled them to think. Originally, they were also force sensitive, but I dialed that back. And then once I tend to go from the outside to the inside, or the inside to the outside. Once I imagine that, then I have to ask myself, well, why would they do that? What motivation would they do that? And so it starts suggesting motivations and cultural things and so forth within the Star Wars universe. This, that's kind of fun. The same thing with creating metagos. Star Wars thrives on monocultures and monoecologies, that you go to a planet and it has one dominant field to it. So one of the first things I wanted to do was to create something that was unique, I hadn't seen before in the Star Wars universe. And so I thought about a geode. Okay. And so I said, well, what would a civilization be like inside a geode? It starts suggesting questions. Okay. And then as a science fiction novelist, by training, once I go there, I start asking, well, how do the people inside here live? How do they make a living? Where do they get their materials? How do they get their water? I ask myself questions like that. With a creature, I'll ask, or a monster, quote unquote, a monster is an animal, right? You just need to turn the lights on. You ask, how does it reproduce? What does it eat? What is its psychology? What is its motivation? So you go through that with Chew and Locke, these 2 different alien beings, and you start coming up with answers. And those answers go back and forth between what are the things I want them to be able to do. Clearly, I want to create a threat, a real threat, something that would test Mace Windu at his very best. Okay, so that we all know we're waiting for them to eventually collide. Okay, we understand the tropes of action, that we want to see the big showdown. Okay, so it had to be something where you had to ask yourself, God, how can Mace survive this? How do you create something like that? And so as I moved from creating a stick figure to creating fully fleshed out people, that was just in the process of writing. I didn't write an encyclopedia about their past or anything before I got started. I started with what I knew, started writing, and then as I wrote and rewrote, I realized, oh, well, this would have to be true here. This would have to be true there. it's like I write like watching a Polaroid picture develop. I start with a basic idea. I go from there to taking everything I know about it and putting it on 3x5 cards and post-it notes and whiteboards and anything else I can do. And I start building up an outline on a Google Doc. And I take everything I know and put it there. I'm not writing a book yet. Okay. And then when it gets to about 4 pages, I'll have a couple people read it. I think, if the story went like this, would this work? And if I can get a positive response, then I take that and I drop it into a screenwriting program. And I wrote a script. I wrote a 200-page script for this book, because a script has dialogue and plot points. What you don't have is complex language and image systems and so forth, the poetics of language that you use. It's just, does this story work? And in a month I can write a script that would take me a year to write the book. But when I've got that, I can say, does this work? There are other tricks that I use to test that, to look at the way different aspects of the story interact with each other. And you can find out more about my writing process at www.lifewritingpremium.com. Anyway, so once I've got that, then I take the script and I transform it into a novel, and then I polish that. I already know the story works. Now it's just a matter of heightening the language and bringing things up and so forth. So at every step, it was like chew and lock. What are they? What do they come from? What do they want? Why are they a threat? How can I create some genuine tension for Mace? That we're not sure whether or not he's going to survive, or someone else that we care about might not survive. So anyway, it's a long answer to a short question.
Well, and you did an excellent job with creating those connections, not only to Mace, but I think you conveyed a very found relationship to help the readers want to be with these characters throughout the entire
I hope
story.
so. I like
really
I said, I honestly tried. That I love the fans. I love you guys. I totally get the power and the value of having an enthusiasm. That I think that Star Wars became what it is at one particular moment, and that was the moment. And I always said this a lot, where Luke is on the Death Star, is going down the trench on the Death Star, and his friends have been killed, and John Williams' music is going boom, 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 and Grand Moff Tarkin is saying, "Fire up the laser," and Carrie Fisher with the cinnamon buns on the side of her head is looking very pensive, and it looks like all is lost. All is lost, and things are happening so fast that you can't keep up. We had never seen effects like that. We'd never seen an avalanche of images and sound and emotions. It was absolutely overwhelming future shock. And at the midst of all of that, you heard Obi-Wan's voice saying, "Trust your feelings." That was the moment at which people all over the world felt a chill, because we all feel like our lives are out of control and things are happening too fast. But to feel that in the middle of all of that, your emotions, your heart, you as an individual human being still matter. That is a moment in which Star Wars went to a completely different level. And all I had to do was to understand that.
100%. Katie actually had a really fun question.
Just go for it.
We love the quirkiness of the in-universe. I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. The games, Djarik was mentioned in this book, and so the question is, why was it so important to include the game Djarik for one of the Jedi's most serious characters like Mace Windu?
Because it enabled me to do a bunch of different things. It enabled me to talk about his relationship with Qui-Gon. It enabled me to take Mace down a peg. He wasn't the best at everything. That humanizes him. Qui-Gon was better than him at this game. Okay. It enabled me to have a way to explain why he was taking the mission. But more importantly than that, it enabled me to talk about something that was canon within Star Wars that suggested an organizing factor for the strategy that Mace had to use. That the idea was he had to set the pieces up, and then he knew that once the game started, once the war started, he could not control it because war is chaos. It also enabled me to create an organizing factor for the visualization of a complex environment. You would say, well, imagine a stack of Dejaric boards. So there were so many things I had to try to accomplish that what you look for is what I call complex equivalence. When you have a huge amount of data, you look for the patterns that are similar within that, and then what symbol can you use that represents a vast amount of information? Because if people already feel like they enjoy and understand Dejar, because you saw it in the first movie, right? That if we can deepen that a little bit, now you have an organizing structure, and all this information I'm giving you will fit into something. And the process of learning is associating something you don't know with something that you do. So by using Dejar, not only could I deepen the Star Wars universe, I could use it as an organizing structure. I could use it to suggest strategy. I could use it to talk about its friendship, on and on and on and on. This is the kind of thing that I look for within a story. It's not just these pieces, but how do all the pieces connect in a way that allows the reader to feel their way through the story rather than thinking their way through the story.
Yeah.
I hope that answers your question.
Oh no, it does. I said,
you can see this is a game for me. I love this game. I love writing. I love storytelling.
We love the passion that comes from these authors, and you could really tell by these interviews that I hope that you get the chance to do one. But recently, Star Wars has been doing these almost like how Variety does the actor with actors and they interview each other. Star Wars has been doing these small little interviews with author to authors. So if you ever get the opportunity to do one, I would absolutely love to hear you talk about writing process in Star Wars with some of these other Star Wars
like
authors.
you said, ask me anything you want.
So one question that might be a little controversial, just because of the debates of course, the breaking of the rules and what are Jedi supposed to be versus their duty and all of these other things. Obviously, the movies can't be changed. It's happened. We've all seen them. You can't go back and change those. But with your detailed relationship for Mace with Kinshan, do you think anything would have changed for Anakin if he had confessed with Mace's feelings for Padme?
What a great question. Yes, I think that if he had confessed his feelings for Padme, something would have to have changed. How would it have changed is another question. That I do not know. But it is obvious that it would have changed things, depending on who he talked to, the moment at which he talked to them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anakin, working backwards from Anakin becoming Darth Vader, it was obvious that there was no way out for him. That once you've established that he's Darth Vader, then all you could do is say, and this is how he became Darth Vader. So if you know the end point, all that's left is, how did this happen? What were his initial flaws? What were the circumstances that exacerbated those flaws? What were the points at which he almost saved himself and almost pulled himself out of it? What was the consequence? I mean, those first 6 movies are the story of the Skywalker family, very directly, where Luke and Darth and Anakin are the major players, but they're also puppets of fate because we know where the story ends. So the job of an author is to acknowledge that your characters are puppets controlled by fate, but to give them enough inwardness that the strings don't show, or we can forget the puppet strings and just embrace the story.
Mm-hmm.
You know, suspension of disbelief. We know that Anakin has to end there. We give him certain flaws about love and connection and his inability to save his mother and his anger issues and, you know, love with an older woman and having to keep it secret. And all these things have to contribute to our sense of he's caught in a trap. He can't get out. He's going to end up Darth Vader, you know, as Weird Al Yankovic said, you know. Maybe later he'll be Vader. Anyway.
So we have two more questions before we let you go, because I do know you're on a little bit of a time strain. We're getting close.
Yeah, I might be able to give you a couple of extra minutes if you have some good questions from people who are watching, you know, but otherwise let's just burn.
One deep cut that I found out after the fact, because of course Katie, with her great knowledge of legend books and everything else, you added into the very end of this book, in the last chapter, Yoda training with Nakata del Gormo. Why add this to this book now?
Because Lucasfilm felt it was time to establish that.
To establish it.
Very simple.
That
Look,
is
man, writing within a media tie-in or an established world is a little bit like Fred Astaire being given a stage and some props, and he looks at this and says, "How do I create art?" I had the job of threading a lot of moving needles, and what remained constant was my commitment to telling the best story that I could. And that means that I have to make these people happy. I'm a tiny little cog in a great big machine. And I understand that. And it does not hurt my ego. You know, if I went into this, you know, I knew the job was dangerous when I took it, as Super Chicken said, Saint Super Chicken. So it was, what do you need from me? Am I prepared to give this to you? If I'm not, I would say no. But if I am, then I follow the rules. And if I have an argument with them, I try to argue as little as possible and to save all of my capital for the moment at which I feel that the argument must be won. I will give up many things. There were things I did with that book that there's one thing I will say when we're off the air, if you're still on, if you want to hear that, you will love, but I'm not going to say it publicly. But it's a good thing. It's one of those, oh, damn, I promise the fans would have loved it, but it was not to be. I can, you know, this is the business. This is the business that you give Fred Astaire a stage of any size and props of any kind, and he would create art. Why? Because he was a master. As simple as that. He was a master. Well, so am I. I'm not at Fred Astaire's level, but I am a master of my craft. And it is my job to do the very best I can. When I accept the responsibility, you better believe I'm going to bring the best I've got. I'm not going to sit back sniping at her or thinking I'm writing down or any nonsense like that. This is my life. This is what I do. And I will not live a day of my life without feeling I have done something meaningful. So I would have been utterly betrayed by any urge inside me to say, you're going to make me do what? I can't do this. I can't do that. You know, I'm a big boy. And I've been in this, you know, for a long time and published over 3 million words of fiction. When I sign up for Star Wars, my job is to deliver Star Wars. Okay, it's like I want people to feel like, damn, that was some Star Wars right there. So Lucasfilm gets to say, add this, add this, add this. Yes, sir.
Well, it was a very nice surprise, according to Katie. Because, like I said, oblivious to me, I read it and I was like, "Oh, that's nice." And then Katie's like,
"Yeah,
did you read
so Katie,
this?"
that was not my choice. That was our choice. You know, project like this is made partially by committee, partially by an individual artist who puts their heart into it.
And we
So
always hear about how the story group comes in and is like, hey, can you include like these little
yeah,
bits
yeah.
in this story? But it's nice to hear like one specifically, because oftentimes you can kind of go, was this like an author pick, like to include this bit from Legends, or was this a story group? Because I
No,
grew up on Legends, so that's always
right,
going to be like my favorite place, even though I love the books that have come out currently. Like, don't get me wrong, but like, that was my home. Like, my daughter's named
sure.
Mara after Mara Jade
Nah.
Skywalker. So, like, that's just where I'm always gonna
Well,
have
there are
a
characters in this book
grounding.
that were named after, some of my relatives.
Mhm.
Maya is my grandniece. Vincent
Yeah.
Oh
is
wow.
is my grandnephew, and Nala is my daughter's pit bull, my grandpuppy.
Now,
I have I have a dog named Antilles after
Oh,
Wedge.
that's great.
So
That's great.
I totally get that.
now I know that me and Katie are really eager to hear some of the juicy stuff that you can't share on air. So we'll go ahead and leave with this last question.
Okay.
Talking about how, people who want to see Star Wars and hear Star Wars with your writing. But I would have to ask, if people loved reading Glass Abyss, what other books of yours would you recommend if they
Well,
like
first
the
of all, I would
taste of Glass
recommend they get
Abyss?
on my mailing list at www.stephenbarneslist.com, because we do a show every week where we talk about writing and life and being a warrior in your life, and how to be a Jedi, even if you don't have midichlorians. So stephenbarneslist.com. But my favorite of my books, my favorite of my books, I think, would be a book I wrote called Lion's Blood. It's available on Amazon, and I put 6 years of my life into researching that book, and I'm very proud of it. I may never put that much work into a book again, except the one I'm working on right now. My wife is encouraging me to put my ego aside and go for it in a way that I have not for a while. And I take my wife very seriously.
It's fun to hear. I actually
That's
just pulled it
awesome.
up and adding to cart right now. So I will
Yeah,
definitely
great,
be
great.
grabbing that book for sure.
I will be
You
too.
guys, like I said, I really enjoyed the interview that you did, and I'm glad I reached out to you. And
Yes.
I hope I will always be nervous about my writing. I'll always have that sinking feeling in my stomach, with a bad review, and I feel a certain exultation with a good review. So I look at that until I've seen 10, 20 reviews and kind of get a sense of the pattern, and then I can back away from it. It's like, okay, fly free, little bird. But I hope I never stop caring about how people respond, and I thank you. And I'm very, very grateful that you found things to love in something that represents a year of my writing life. That's what we hoped for. I'm not going to lie about
Mhm.
that.
Well,
It was an awesome read.
it was an awesome read. We greatly appreciate for you reaching out to us. Now, I know that you've already plugged them in, but we love plugging our shows and everything else. Can you please tell the audience again everything that you're currently doing, works that
Oh,
you've
I'm working on a dramatic podcast, like an old time radio show. We have our life writing podcast that comes out every week, lifewritingpodcast.com, where we talk about writing and life. And then I do the Fire Dance group, which is about personal development. I'm working on a martial arts body horror piece.
Oh
Ooh.
wow.
And it's not like anything that's been. Imagine David Cronenberg directing Enter the Dragon, and you'll have it.
Oh,
And I'm raising my family in training to go back to Manila in 2026. I spent a week there practicing stick fighting and knife fighting. Oh my God, what a great week I had! So I'm just involved in my life, man. I finished another book with my mentor Larry Niven, and we're working. Actually, we're going to be direct. We've got funding to direct and produce a short film from one of our
Oh.
IP. and then if that works out well, we'll be directing the full version of the movie. So the ideal outcome for this book is that it does so well that Lucasfilm wants me back, but I'm so busy I ain't got the time to do it.
We would love to hear that update. We would love to hear it.
Yeah, after we're off the air, I will tell you what the sequel to this book would be. I won't tell you on air, but I'll tell you completely. So let's close this. I can talk to you while we've got the time.
With that,
and maybe
guys,
I'll come back on some other day.
With that, guys, all of our plugs. We're not going to keep y'all for too much longer. So thank you again for taking your time to listen to this interview. And again, go out and get Star Wars Mace Windu Glass Abyss. It is available Amazon, Barnes & Noble, your local library. If you are an audiobook listener, you can check it out on Audible. And with that, guys, thank you so much. Katie, you go ahead and do your intro because I always want to start it and then I always trip up. So you do your magical intro.
With that, guys, I want to wish everyone a great day or night, whatever time of day you are listening or watching, and we will see y'all next time. May the Force be with you.